Hello, welcome everyone. We're excited to have you. I'm Seth Merrill. I'm on the content marketing team here at Lucid, and you are here for how Lucid's engineering teams use Lucid. As everyone's filtering in, we'd love to have you hop in the chat and introduce yourselves. We're going to get started here in just a minute. But in the meantime, if you'd like to let us know where you're joining from, what do you do, any other fun facts about yourself, we'd love to get to know you a little bit. We're going to be really active in the chat today, so I'd love to hear exactly who we're talking to today. Again, we'll let people filter in and then we'll get started here in just a minute. All right, awesome. We're excited to have you all join us today. And I'm really excited to have Brian, Ben, and Ryan here on in a minute to talk about many of the ways that our own engineering teams here at Lucid use Lucid. And I think you're going to find some great use case inspiration from them. But before we get started, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items. So the first housekeeping item, and this is a question that we get asked a lot, we'll remind you at the end as well. Yes, this session is being recorded. We are going to be providing you a link to the on-demand webinar to the email that you used to register so that you can rewatch it, share it with your team, whatever you'd like. So the link to that on-demand version will be sent to the same email you used to register. Look for that in your inbox tomorrow. If for some reason you don't receive that email, just go to our webinar hub on lucid.co and go to the same place you used to register for this webinar, and you'll find that video there as well. Secondly, again, we want this to be interactive, so please ask questions. Our presenters are going to be keeping an eye on the chat, on the Q&A panel throughout the webinar, and we want to engage in questions during the webinar as well as the end if we have time. So please use the chat, and we're going to be answering as many as we can get through. And then finally, we have enabled live captions, so if you need those, feel free to turn those on. All right, so that's it for our housekeeping. The thing I'm probably most excited about as we get into our content today is just the lineup of presenters that we have. Ben, Brian, and Ryan have nearly 40 combined years of experience at Lucid that they've been spending solving really complex problems in this visual collaboration and intelligent diagramming space. So not only are they well versed on all things Lucid, they are also very familiar with a lot of the common struggles that we know engineering teams like yours face. And especially in the last few years with the rise of hybrid and remote work, we know that those challenges are probably even more complex than ever. So to get us warmed up a bit, we wanted to kind of pose this as a question to you. If you want to, again, drop in the chat, what are some of the biggest challenges that your own engineering teams are facing as you try to collaborate, innovate, and manage your work? So take a minute, go in the chat. We'd love to hear your thoughts here on what some of the biggest challenges are that your engineering teams are facing as you go about your work, as you collaborate, and as you try and innovate. We'll give you a minute there to answer. And as people are answering, Ben, Ryan, and Brian, would love to kind of see like what in the chat is resonating with you, things that you've seen on your own teams.
Yeah, I see a lot here that rings true to me. Everyone who worries about how hard it is to interact with Jira has a place in my heart. That's something that we've worked through a lot of integrations into a lot of our core systems to make it a lot easier for our teams to be able to work with other complex outside systems that maybe don't have the greatest visual side to them, where here at Lucid, that's sort of our bread and butter. And so I think that's one that I certainly see and understand.
Yeah, and as more and more meetings are happening remote, I see one about engagement and indications, like understanding what engagement's happening with remote calls and such, that resonates as well. That is a challenge that we face, as you're not all in the same room, making sure everybody's staying engaged and excited, and knowing that they're really involved, not off doing something else on another monitor.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of good thoughts in here, and this is all stuff that we've seen as we worked with customers too. It's really hard to share context and do that really rich cross-functional communication without some kind of visual framework. Maintaining documentation, records of discussion and decisions and strategy, is also really difficult. And just in general, it's gotten harder to, I think, stay aligned as a team. So we're excited to hopefully address some of these common challenges today as we talk about some of our favorite use cases for the Lucid Visual Collaboration Suite in the context of engineering, and how the Lucid Suite can be applied to some of these problems to ultimately help your team work with more clarity so that you can spend more time building and innovating. And as we get into the content today, we do want to clarify that there are literally hundreds of possible frameworks, activities, things that engineering teams can do in Lucid, and we're not going to cover those all comprehensively today. We don't intend for this to be a step-by-step product education or a training course, but rather hope to just provide you some inspiration from a few of our favorite use cases, like team visualization, architecture reviews, and managing OKRs, and some others. And at the end of the webinar, we will be pointing you to some links and some resources where you can dive even deeper if you're asking, okay, what's next? What else can I do? And so we'll be pointing you to our integration marketplace, training courses, deeper training courses you can go and do, and templates you can use off the shelf today. So if you're asking those questions and you want even more, we have tons more content for you, and we will continue doing webinars as part of this webinar program too, that will hopefully continue to answer some of those questions. So if there's additional content that you're not seeing that you want, please give that feedback to us as well. But do know that there will be a variety of links and resources that you will be able to go to at the end of the webinar to dive even deeper. And with that, I'm really excited to have Ben and Ryan and Brian come on now and share some of their favorite use cases. I know you're probably tired of hearing from me, so I'm gonna turn it over to you guys to dive right in and do some demo. So Ryan, let's start with you and have you introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Ben and Brian.
Awesome. Hey everyone, my name is Ryan Stringham. I'm the chief architect here. And when I started at Lucid, I was Lucid's first intern. So seeing Lucid grow through the years, and as we've grown the engineering organization, how we can better use the tools that we have at Lucid to get everyone on the same page and help people be aligned on what we're working on. So I'm excited to share our use cases today. Ben?
Yeah, I'm Ben. So I'm the co-founder, CTO, mad scientist character here at Lucid. I have been here since day one and have remained deeply involved in the technical implementation of all of our different systems, and continue to be a power user of our own products as we continue to figure out what's the best way to work together visually.
And I'm Brian Pugh. I'm the Senior Vice President of Engineering, and I joined Ben really early on when it was just he and I working in a basement together, writing code together. So it's been about 12 years or so. And before that, worked for various software companies in Utah and Silicon Valley, but have loved being at Lucid and building out visual collaboration tools that I think are really helpful for engineering organizations. I love working on products that we can actually use ourselves. And with that, maybe I will just jump in to talk about one of the challenges that I've faced as a leader at Lucid, that Lucid products have helped me solve. So at Lucid as a leader, myself and the directors that I work with have traditionally had a problem, which is that once we have an idea of what we want to build, we've got a pretty good sense of what is it that we want to build? What are the new features? What are some of the epics we want to tackle? We need to figure out exactly who's going to build what. And that actually can be pretty time consuming. And traditionally, we haven't had a good way to visualize the plan for who's going to be doing what from that set of features or epics or stories or the roadmap that we've got in front of us. So I'm talking about a plan for the quarter or maybe for the year. where we might be adjusting Scrum teams. We're, like I said, adding new epics and stories, or we're adding new hires because people are coming on, or we've got interns coming for the summer. And these are like real scenarios that we face at Lucid often. You know, this year in Q2 alone, we added 25 interns, and we had at least that many new hires in that quarter. So we really did have to really think about, like, where do these people, what is the best way to do this? And I guess some of the questions that we face are, how do we optimize Scrum teams and manager structure? Do we have enough experienced engineers on each team so they can really thrive? Do we have enough engineers who can mentor these new grads or these interns that are coming on? Or how do I organize people managers across the Scrum teams? So it's been a bit of a journey for me to find a solution in this space. Years ago, like 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I started just using spreadsheets. That was okay. It was really hard to visualize. It was just all text. It was really hard to make changes. There was a lot of manual process. And I never felt like it really captured an easy way for me to understand what was going on with the organization. So then I moved over to Trello. Some of you may be familiar with Trello. And that worked okay for a while. It was way better than spreadsheets because I could have containers that represent Scrum teams and put individuals into those containers. And it was easier to make changes. And I had some visualization there, but it was still really painful to create that as the organization got larger. It was hard to keep up to date. There were lots of manual steps. And I never really felt like there was so much I wanted to have in the visualization that I just couldn't do with that functionality. So years ago, I challenged the team to solve this problem in Lucidchart, and the result is kind of what I want to show today, which, again, though I might be a little bit biased, I find that this way of managing engineering teams to be the best I've ever seen in my career. So with that, let me go ahead and share my screen, and we'll dive into a little bit of what it is that I am talking about. So, all right, hopefully you can see my screen here, and I've got Lucidchart up here. What you can see here is a basic org chart in Lucidchart. And this probably looks familiar to you. This doesn't look all that different from any org chart that you may have seen in other products and such, where you can just see who reports to who. There's a couple things that are interesting to see, though, that, like, you know, if we zoom in on people, we can see we've got not just their name and their title, but also how many direct reports they have and how many total reports there are in their full line. You can see Jordan here has 45 total reports, it looks like. But I mentioned what I'm really interested in is less about just who reports to who, but really managing these Scrum teams and figuring out what teams are going to tackle what projects. So I can create within Lucidchart a Scrum team view, and I'm going to show you how I did this in a minute here. But what I did is take that basic org chart that I actually imported from my HRIS system, from my HR system, and said, show this to me by Scrum team. And at the top, it's got the name of each Scrum team, and then the individuals on each Scrum team in that container. So I can look across all my teams there. And in fact, I can see there might be some people down here who are not assigned to a team. They're still unassigned. And it's pretty easy for me to just grab them, drag and drop them onto a team. Now, Aiden will be on Project Vortex 3. So get a pretty good idea for what the teams are. But you can also see there's a lot going on here. You can see these I's, PM, UX. These are to help me see what's really going on with the teams. So I created what are called conditional formatting rules, which are right up here in Lucidchart. And I said, let's look at one of them. Let's choose the PM one here is good. So this is the rule that made this little PM icon show up right here. And what it says is go to the shape data. And if the shape data has a job title that contains the text product, then create an icon that's a text badge that's got a green background, and the text will be PM. Okay, that rule is what led to this PM showing up on Joe, because Joe is a senior product manager. I did the same thing for UX and QA. And for engineering, I did it a little bit different. I said, for my engineers, entry-level engineers, make them this light blue. For my senior engineers, let's make them this kind of purpley color. And for my staff engineers, let's make them this darker color. And that gives me a good way to kind of zoom out here and just say, okay, where are my senior engineers? Do I have some places where, if I look here, this Business Tools 2 team has no senior engineers and no staff engineers. Is that a problem? Is that something I need to think about? I can, look across here and see, oh, wait, API 3 does not have QA on it. Is that a problem? Is there a good reason why I don't have QA on that team? What do I need to do about that? So I can create all of these different I have a visualization with a bunch of rules here assigned to it that allows me to really get a good sense for what's going on with the organization. And as we're trying to plan out, then we've got all these new people that I need to place onto teams. It gives me all the information I need to do that effectively and efficiently. So question though is, this looks all pretty and everything, but like, how did I get here? Like, how did I get it to where I can get to this valuable visualization of my teams? So let me show you a little bit about how I got there. If I start here with a spreadsheet. So in this case, I started with a test instance we have of Workday. So it's some fake data I've got in Workday where I said, export my Workday information. Workday is an HR, a human resources system. You could export from whatever HR system you've got. And I just got, the employee ID, their name, a few other fields, including who their manager is. And I'm going to, before I do the next step, I'm going to copy this column of Scrum team, make a new column, and I'm going to call it original Scrum team. And I'll show you why in a second. But with that, I'll just take that and say, let's go ahead and download that. We'll download it as a CSV file. Okay. Now I'm going to go to a blank Lucidchart document. So this is just, I just opened a blank document. There's nothing on this document anywhere. I'm going to say, hey, I want to import some data. And the data I want to import is actually an org chart. And so I want to, it's giving me a little bit of information. So I'm going to say, yes, I want to import my data. I download it as a CSV file. I could go directly to Bamboo HR or from Excel, a variety of options here. Now it's going to ask me it's going to ask me for the document. So there's the thing that I just downloaded. And it's going to say, okay, what is your unique identifier? I'm going to use ID, the employee ID. For the supervisor ID, in my data set, it was called manager ID. So I'm going to choose that so that Lucid now knows how to map supervisors. Full name is what it will use for name. For role, we'll use job title. And then for images, in our data set, we called that column image. Okay. With that, now it's asking me, hey, do you want to just create one big org chart, or do you want to create separate org charts for each different organization, for each person who does not have a manager above them? We'll just create one big org chart in this case. It's letting me know that there's two different people that don't have a manager ID. That's fine. So with that, it'll now actually go out there, import the data, and we get that representation that we were looking at before. Doesn't have quite all the fields that we had on the other one. So there's things I can change here. I could change the spacing, the layout. I could lay it out in a variety of different ways. I can choose different shape styles. The other one that we were looking at was more in this sort of shape style here. I've got all the employee fields here available to me, so I can turn on any of those. If I want to see the department, I can just click in there and get the department to show up as well. And this is where you saw in that last one, Lucid's automatically calculating how many direct reports and how many total reports are in the downline. I could turn those on and see those as well. So, but what I don't have is that view that I had of Scrum teams. So how did I get to that? To do that, I created what's called a group view. So that's right up here in my visualizations. I could say, I want to create a group view, which basically means that I want to group individuals who are similar by some property that is on each one of those individuals. So in my case, I'm going to choose the field of Scrum team and say, everybody who's got Scrum team the same, that field is the same, put them in a group together. Okay, so we'll create this group view, and here we've got it. So I've got API, API2, data consistency 2. And so I can quickly now I've got that basic structure where I can see what Scrum team each person's in. And then from here, I started to create some of these conditional formatting rules that I talked about to help us figure out what's going on. So if I want to add.
Sorry to interrupt. We've got a couple of questions in the chat about how you deal with people on multiple teams. So we do have scenarios where we've got like a QA shared across multiple teams or a UX resource across multiple teams. So how do we show that here?
Yeah, they would just show up. Let me see if there's any examples. I don't know off the top of my head, but if you had people that were in multiple teams, you could do a comma separated list of the teams and it will put them on each one of the Scrum teams. So I'm not seeing one off the top of my head here, but it is, if they do have that comma separated list under Scrum team, they will show up in both Scrum teams. So that it would be one entity, but it would show up in both Scrum teams. Yeah. Cool. So let me go ahead and feel free to interrupt again if other questions come up, Ben or Ryan, go ahead and interrupt me. I'm going to create a rule though. I want to create a rule that says, in this case, I'm going to do a formula, and I'm just going to put the formula in here that says, if Scrum team doesn't equal the original Scrum team, then why don't we do an icon? We'll put an exclamation mark on there. We'll make it red so we can easily see it, and we'll save that. Okay. So remember, I added that extra column in here of original Scrum team. Now, if I come in here and I say I'm going to take Sydney and move Sydney to a new Scrum team, we'll put Sydney on data consistency. Did I?
The rule didn't get applied to the whole page.
Oh, did I? Let me do that again.
So go back out.
Oops.
And click the triple dot on the rule.
5 page rules.
No, like on rule 1, the
Yep.
3 dots say apply to whole page.
Okay. So I didn't have it selected when I did this.
Apply to all.
So, sorry, when I created the rule, I had one thing selected, not the whole page. So it created the rule just for one part of my document. But now that I've applied it to the whole page, anytime I make a change. So what happened now is I'm changing the underlying data set so that the Scrum team changed for Maximilian. He's now on API 2, but his original Scrum team was API 3. So that rule I created where I said, hey, Scrum team is not equal to original Scrum team, that kicked in, and I can quickly see, oh, let's put that icon on there, and I can see that it showed up. So with this document that we were looking at before, that's kind of what we had. Rules like that, and you can see I had that same rule where I had moved, it looks like Bailey from one team to another, so the little exclamation mark showed up. But that's how I got, making rules like that is how I got all this whole visualization that really gives me a good idea of what's going on with the entire Scrum team. So summary, it's really easy to visualize using Lucidchart. It's really easy for me to visualize what's going on with, even if I've got like 50 or so Scrum teams, I can quickly see what's going on with each team, which team needs more mentors, which team needs more senior engineers, which team may be missing QA. It's way better than spreadsheets and way more information in the visualization than I could ever get from just something like spreadsheets or from Trello. And it's easy to get here. There's not all the manual process of trying to type all this in. I can just, import it from a data set or connect directly to my HR system, depending on which one it is. And also add that this allows for real-time collaboration. It really is a team sport to figure these things out. And I'm working closely with, our chief product officer and our UX team and my engineering directors. This is all, real-time collaboration can happen with all of this. Asynchronous communication, it's very easy to add comments in here, mention people. So it can really be a collaborative sport. And I'm really thrilled with what we have. And would encourage anyone running agile engineering teams to give it a shot. And, try this as a way to kind of run your Scrum teams and get a sense for what's going on. So it's a little bit about how Lucid is using Lucid to manage our teams.
There's a question here. The team lead icon, how does that work?
In this case, I just used, so we didn't have team lead as a formal title in our HR system. So what we did is just move whoever was going to be the team lead to the top of the container. And we always just mark the top of the container as the team lead.
Yeah.
So in this case, that's what we did.
We have a conditional formatting rule that finds the top person. So if you swap Craig on API 1 to be at the top, they'll get that label.
Yep, exactly right. Let's see, are there any other questions we should answer, Ryan or Ben? If not, I will pass it over to Ryan to talk about some other use cases we've got here at Lucid.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. That was awesome. I want to talk some about how we coordinate among teams with architecture and building up new systems or features or whatever. So we have a system at Lucid where engineers can request to have an architecture review where they can get the right people in the meeting to talk about the feature that they are planning on building and make sure we're asking all of the right questions. And when we do that, we have everyone who's doing an architecture review start off in a Lucidspark board. So here, I'll share my screen and show you what our template looks like. So this is our template for an architecture review that we use in the engineering org here. And it guides the person doing the review through how to fill out this template. So like start here, follow the yellow stickies. First, describe your problem. Here are some questions you should consider while you're describing the problem. And then it asks them to take a step back, think about the context. When we get to the review, we're going to ask the questions like, do we really need to do this? Which requirements are actually required and which ones are just considerations we need to think about. So we have the developer think through that before we have the review. And then we say, here are some common considerations or requirements. Make sure you've thought through each of these. If you haven't thought about performance yet, think about it before we have the review. And it's just common things that we want everyone to consider. And then once they've done that, they put in here some of their potential solutions. They can put what we like or what we don't like about them. And that'll get us into a really good starting point for our architecture review. Our architecture reviews are generally pretty high level. We don't often get super technical. They're more like directional focused. So we don't have deep technical diagrams in our architecture reviews, at least many of them. Sometimes that's what's necessary because we're reviewing something that's deep and technical, but a lot of times it's just really directional and making sure that we consider everything that needs to be considered as we're like diving into a new problem. So here's an example of an architecture review that we had that we've already conducted. And you can see like the types of questions that were here. This time we were doing a review over our extension APIs. And some of the stuff does get technical, like we're putting in some stuff about requesting access to a document and what the API might look like. But you get like the nice real-time collaboration aspects of people being able to react to things with emoji or be able to use freehand drawing to like cross out things that didn't work out or circle things that we liked. And then just everyone is getting aligned on like what is the path that we should take to work on this feature. And a lot of times the outcome of an architecture review is just a direction that the team should start going. And as they learn more, it may change the decision that came out of architecture review. And that is fine and expected. But this is a really good way for us to get everyone on the same page. Sometimes when we're doing an architecture review or we're just chatting with each other about something, we kind of talk past each other on the deep technical aspects. And then we really need to dive in and do like a technical diagram to help everyone understand what's actually happening. So here's an example where we had someone who was talking with Ben, who's here with us, about issues with how we should sync data between third-party services and Lucid. And as we were talking about it back and forth, it was like hard to do that just with words. And this is an example of like within like 3 minutes, whipping out a simple diagram here that maps out what the flow of the data is and how we should handle errors and conflicts. And it quickly got us on the same page. We understood what the problem we were talking about is and how to move forward from that.
Yeah, I'll say like I was in fact in this conversation and I was the one who could not understand the wall of text. This is actually really the bread and butter of my use of Lucidchart. It's a lot of, something that would turn into several paragraphs of text, but can be explained very simply with just a handful of shapes with, lines and text. And it immediately allows, that whole other half of your brain to engage. We're very good at immediately interpreting visual information. And so for me, like this was tremendously helpful.
Yep. So that's the overview of how we use it a lot for like more architecture focused things at Lucid. I'm going to pass it over to Ben now, and he'll share some more stuff about how we use our APIs to build stuff internally for us.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about how our engineering team here at Lucid is using Lucidchart to help us with planning and testing and executing our new AI-driven features. Large language model AI sort of burst onto the scene so suddenly and so recently. A lot of the tooling around it, around prompt engineering, and just generally around testing and versioning and all of that. It's very new, very untested, generally very rough, and we wanted to be able to work together to design our prompts to these systems. Develop little sets of test inputs that we could try against multiple models and different versions of system prompts, and reuse pieces of prompts from one project to another, and collaborate with each other, talking through the strengths and weaknesses of the different approaches that we were taking for engineering to a particular problem. And it felt like a thing that Lucidchart should be very good at, but we certainly weren't then ready to start shipping some kind of new feature to all of our users specializing in that kind of an area. And we were still had a lot to learn ourselves about how we wanted to go about doing this. And so what we decided to do was to build a solution for ourselves using our developer platform, specifically our extension API. Our extension API is a new set of APIs that lets you add custom shapes, custom UI elements like panels and pop-up modals and menu items and so forth, and interactions to Lucidchart and Lucidspark to serve some particular need. So you can build an extension with a name. You can build it with a name to publish it in the marketplace for other people to use, or as we did, you can build something just for your own internal use. In our case, we added some custom shapes representing different parts of a prompt, like the system prompt and the user prompt, and variables that you would insert into one or the other based on user input and the responses and so forth. So let me share my screen, and I will show you what this extension looks like inside of Lucidchart. So here we have this. This is like one of our very first initial experiments with having a user provide to us a description of a diagram they want and then have us draw it for them, right? And so, if the user said, I want a diagram of choosing what car insurance to buy, what prompt could we provide to the system that would give us a good output that we could then interpret and draw into a diagram that makes sense? So we, all of these shapes that you're seeing, like this system prompt shape and the user prompt and the model output, all of those are custom shapes that were built as part of this extension. Some of them also have custom data associated with them. So for example, on the system prompt, we allow you to choose which, of the models that we currently have deployed you want to use when executing this prompt. And, we also built this custom UI panel, which again, pardon the programmer art here, but this is where you can find a little bit of instructions and also the content itself that you want to pull out. So if we wanted to use this to try something new, if we make a new page here, if you drag out, here's a system prompt, here is a user prompt, and actually our extension code is watching us add these to the page and has automatically connected them with the appropriate line. And you can then execute this against the model by right-clicking and going to our custom menu item and saying execute this prompt, which will go and hit the model that we've selected and see what it is that it replies with. And so what this allows us to do is to, on the surface of this visual canvas, be able to experiment with, what works, what doesn't work, what gives us responses that are useful for the purposes that we currently have, right? I mean, you could say, the user might ask, how do I cook a turkey? And it might be more useful if we update the system prompt to say, like, give the result as a simple numbered list of steps, right? And maybe then that's a thing that we could interpret, more easily and use more directly, and then you can rerun this and see how it goes. And you can pile up different user prompts and sort of experiment with it and rerun all of them So, over here, as we look back at some of our early experimentation, we'd say, the user will describe a process and Lucy will respond with the JSON format of the diagram. We have this interpolated bit that comes from elsewhere on the page of like, here's a description to the LLM of the format. And then, we actually wrote into our extension that if we got a response from the model that looked like this format, that we would actually draw it on the canvas. And so we can execute these and get responses back. And this may take a while because this is a more complicated prompt, but when you get responses back, it will actually draw those as shapes for you on the canvas. Anyway, this document was one of our earliest sort of sets of experiments around this. And you can see, here in the early experimentation, there's some lessons learned about, what models do well responding certain formats, and, the content of the diagrams that we were getting. Maybe we should encourage, non-linear processes in the response. Oh, did that ever come back? Sure did. Here's the diagram. Maybe we should encourage non-linear responses. And so, we cloned that page onto another page and adjusted the prompts, adjusted the format. We added this. I just bolded this so that's easy to see, and then reran all of the same questions and saw what we got. And in fact, we got substantially better content back as a result. And then there's a lot of other experimentation around this. Like, well, a lot of times a user's query is very vague, non-specific, and we could actually use one of these LLM models to give us a better query that we can then feed back into it and say, give me a diagram based on this expanded query, which then, we wired back into our prompt from before and got some, again, probably a better set of results, and with, again, a bunch of lessons learned. And so what this is allowing us to do, I don't want to belabor the point on AI specifically. I'm not saying, although maybe you should, I'm not saying you should use Lucid to work on, AI prompt engineering specifically, but this is an example of a place where we had a very specific use case that we wanted to leverage all of the power that we get from the Lucid platform of the real-time collaboration and the asynchronous collaboration as well, and the documentation and the easy visual sort of interpretation of information. And we very quickly, this extension was probably, it's on the order of tens of hours of development effort and maybe a couple thousand lines of code altogether with the shapes. With a pretty modest investment, we were able to get a meaningful customization of the Lucid platform that was going to help us with our particular use case. And that's something that you can do in your own, environments. So the extension API is still in beta. If you want to experiment with it ahead of its official launch next month, you can go to developer.lucid.co. And there's a link there to the beta extension API documentation, which should walk you through how to build something like what I showed here and many other kinds of extensions in order to add new functionality to our products. And we'll also be hosting another webinar specifically around our API and developer platform, soon after that launch.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah.
Super cool. I just want to emphasize what Ben just said. I think it's so cool. What he showed, all the stuff with AI and all is really cool and all, but really what he's really showing is the power of Lucid's extensible platform. All that AI integration could have been done by you or your IT team at your company. Hopefully that gives you a sense for the power of what the Lucid platform is and how much you could do beyond just using what we've provided if you've got, development resources and things to actually build on top of the platform that we've built over the years. All right, with that, let's go to one last example. So at Lucid, we use an OKR process. Some of you may be familiar with OKRs. It stands for Objectives and Key Results. And it's just a method for setting goals that's really common in many industries. And one of the challenges that we found with OKRs is figuring out how do leaders get updates from the teams without taking too much time from the teams. So in our case, as an R&D team leadership, we were setting quarterly goals with the OKR process. And myself and the chief product officer and other leaders, we'd like to get updates weekly on how we're doing towards those quarterly OKRs that we'd been setting. So we used to do a weekly meeting, and it took a lot of prep time from those on the Scrum teams. There were a lot of people involved, and it was mostly a readout where they were kind of reporting out on what had happened with each one of the key results. And as time went on, we started to think it wasn't a meeting that was sufficiently valuable to justify the cost. But if we just cancel the meeting, the problem remains. How does leadership, we'd like to understand what's going on with OKR progress and with their blockers and their successes, kind of where we're at. So the solution we arrived at was to use a Lucidspark board to help us get these updates. So let me just share an example of what the board might look like. Here you can see the board. And what we created was a board where we had some instructions for the teams who would be filling these out to get an idea of what to do. And what we suggested is that they, for each key result, for each one of their objectives, and for each key result, have a little block here where we name the key result we're looking for, who owns it, what the current score would be, what we forecast the score will be at the end of the quarter, and how confident we are in that forecast. And then we usually would have some quantitative data, some graphs showing how we're tracking towards it, and then different information about progress, work plans, blockers, and key decisions and learnings. So let me go over here, and I kind of mocked up an example of what it might look like. Supposing our objective is to improve product quality and stability, you might have a key result to reduce the average number of critical bugs reported by customers per month by 20%. So we've got some owners. The current score maybe is 0.85. The forecast is 0.7. And we got 90% confidence. It keeps track of when this was last updated for us. So when we go back in, we can see when it was updated and make sure we're looking at the latest information. Then we'll have a graph that is linking out to an Excel, or in this case, it's a Google Sheet that is keeping track of where we actually are. It's got what is the forecast in order to get a 1 on this key result, what would be the forecast in order to get a 0.7 on this key result, and what would the actuals be. So the red would be the actuals. And often we see people putting in notes, things like, hey, there's only partial data for this last data point, so take that with a grain of salt. And then I'll have information like what is the progress, what's the work plan, are there some blockers, are there some risks, decisions or learnings that we've got from that. But what it translates into is often you'll see all kinds of sticky notes. Like there's a certain, in our case, what we do is we say by the end of the day, Monday, everybody will have this updated. And then the leadership goes in on Tuesdays and they'll drop a lot of sticky notes in here, questions they've got. You might mention somebody here. You said, what happened with the templates test? And you mentioned Bryn. So Bryn will know that she needs to go back in here and answer this question. So you've got commenting, easy to use with stickies, links out to other documents. And we do it every week. So this would be the previous week where, we didn't have as much data yet, but we can kind of keep track and look through the history of seeing how we progress with our OKRs. I'll just add one more piece here and then we'll stop because I think we've used most of our time here. We often end up using different visual activities to do this as well. There may be a question that have come up and the Scrum team leader or the product manager might say, I need a question answered. Like, we're not sure who's in charge of the content of templates. And so they can just invite everyone to go do a visual activity right here on the board where they would come in and say, hey, I think it's actually the PM, or it's a UX, or is it the template team or a US researcher? They can decide where it is, they can submit that, and then they can go view results. In this case, I'm the only one on the board, so there's not going to be a lot to see, but they can see the results from everybody who had taken it. There's a lot of things like that that really facilitate the collaboration so that we can still get the value that we need, the updates we need so that we kind of understand what's going on and resolve issues, but not have to spend a lot of time preparing slides, pulling everybody together, coordinating schedules. We still meet live once a month for a deeper discussion, but we feel like we've significantly increased the efficiency of getting OKR updates by using Lucidspark and not losing, with those asynchronous updates, we have a good idea of what's going on. And then when we do these monthly live updates where we're actually connecting together in person or over a Zoom meeting, those can be focused on resolving the issues that have been identified in these asynchronous updates or diving in deep on where there's particular issues. So I think we've been able to find a real sweet spot using Lucidspark and visual activities to allow us to just work more effectively and more efficiently in just managing our OKR process. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Seth. I think we've hit on the main things we wanted to show.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. If you want to stop screen sharing, I'm going to pull up mine again. Yeah, thank you all for joining this webinar today, and also Brian, Ben, and Ryan for preparing some content. We do have a little bit of time. If anyone would like to post any questions in the chat, we have about 5 to 10 minutes. We can answer any questions that you'd like to hear. And as promised as well, I will also be posting some resources, and we'll be going over those resources with a few final slides to help you really dive deeper. So yeah, any questions about the content? Also, additionally, I think we'd love to hear, like, what other use cases would you like to see us talk about, or that you kind of need some inspiration on that we might be able to do future content on. I'm going to give people a little bit more time to jump into the chat and ask questions. I wanted to call out a comment earlier from Doug that I really liked, that said, it's helpful to see some new ways to use, Lucid beyond just flowcharts and process diagrams. And so I want to pose this question to you three, Ben, Brian, and Ryan. As you kind of think of these, maybe like simple or under the radar use cases for Lucidspark and Lucidchart that aren't, these deep technical use cases, what things strike out as like some creative or particularly like, oh, like that's really neat and useful ways that your teams have used Lucid in their own workflows?
I'm always impressed when I see like how often the people on my team and around me are using it just for like the very early process of their work of development or of new project planning and so forth. Like, it's very easy to just get in a room together with people. If you don't have access to the Lucid platform, you'll often get together in a room and you'll talk about 100 different ideas, or you'll scribble things under a whiteboard, and it'll be gone at the end of the meeting, and half of it is forgotten. And so it's because I think these kinds of visual collaboration tools are new to us, it's very easy to overlook them as something that you can use on the regular sort of day-to-day basis to help you to like get your thoughts down on paper, as it were. And then, I've also found that when you get things onto the canvas, even if it's really wrong, right? It's that very first draft. It gives you this kind of straw man for everybody to talk about. It gives like a sort of center of gravity to the conversation that you have, which allows you to have a lot more productive conversation. Even if you're not using a lot of the more technical features and some of the neat stuff that we demoed today, just using it as a shared mind space, that it helps a lot in my experience.
I'll add one of the things that I found really useful recently that related to a feature we've released more recently is if we're looking at technical diagrams or architecture diagrams or things like that, within Lucid, you can switch from, those tend to be in Lucidchart, and you can actually just switch to view that in Lucidspark, where you can put timers on and have brainstorming tools and easily add stickies and app mentions and all those kinds of things. So that, when I need all the tools I need to create a technical architecture diagram, I've got those in Lucidchart. When we're then meeting and brainstorming about how to update the architecture things like that, we can switch over into the Lucidspark interface. Same document, push a button, and 2 seconds later, you're in the Lucidspark interface, where you've got timers and laser pointers and easily to put stickies on there and those kinds of things. So you can keep the same content, but have the right UI for whatever phase of the project you're in at that moment. And going back and forth between the products with the same content has been really cool to see that's something that we released in May of this year. And it's just been really valuable for our teams to be able to do that. I'll mention there's a couple of questions that ask about integrations. And I think JAMA and specifically was asked. I don't think we have a JAMA integration specifically, but I will say what Ben mentioned before. We're launching our kind of extensible platform for Lucid software here in the next month or so. And it means that not only can you as a customer build the kinds of things that Ben showed. It also means that all of our partners can build those kinds of things too. And we've already got a whole bunch of partners that are actively working on those. And so, you know, as we get those and see your recommendations of some of the things that you're interested in, those are people that we can reach out to as well. And we expect to have the number of integrations continue to increase dramatically, as it has even in the last year. We've added, I don't know, something like 30 or 40 integrations in the last year. And we'll continue to see that grow, the number of integrations we can, as now partners can do that themselves without us having to build those as well.
Awesome. I'm seeing one question here about format condition and how to create that. I think that might be pertaining to your piece, Brian.
Let's see. I'm trying to find the question here.
From Nancy.
How to create that. Why don't we'll find you some documentation. We've got a page on our site that kind of goes over how to create conditional formatting rules like that. And we can link that. I'll find the link here in a minute and I'll include it in the chat. And so you can go with it from there.
Oh, looks like Ryan already beat you to it.
Excellent. Thanks, Ryan.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I do want to go really quickly over a few of these resources. I've dropped them in the chat, but in case you'd like to easily access them here, we have a variety of pre-recorded and regular live training labs that you can get to at this QR code, or again, you can go find the link that I shared up above. This is going to be great for anyone that wants to continue your education on Lucidchart and Lucidspark. There's a variety and dozens of beginner and intermediate courses that you can find there. Next, again, we've had a lot of great questions about, you know, how do I do stuff like this myself? We have a lot of templates that are ready for you to use off the shelf for both Lucidchart and Lucidspark. So again, would encourage you to go visit the website, our respective product websites, and you can find a variety of templates there to get you started. And then finally, I just wanted to call out, we also, again, we discussed integrations here. You can go find all the integrations that you might, you know, want to incorporate into your workflows to make, you know, your work a little bit easier, or to, you know, bring some additional functionality to Lucid in our integrations marketplace. So this link will take you directly to one specifically for engineering teams that you might find useful. Just checking the chat again really quick. It doesn't look like we have any additional questions. Brian, Ben, and Ryan, thank you again for joining the super informative and I think a helpful session. And that's being echoed in the chat right now. So again, thank you everyone for joining, and we hope you have a great day.